And President Trump pardoned the January 6th defendants. Police fraternal organizations took special exception to the freeing of those convicted of assaulting police officers. One of those pardoned is Robert Morss, an Army veteran who was a part-time history teacher in Shaler at the time of his arrest.
Tasting freedom for the first time in 3.5 years, Morss says he's set to get on with his life. He had a spirited conversation about his actions that day with KDKA lead investigator Andy Sheehan, and Andy's here with the first of two parts of that conversation.
He served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan, and for that his country owes him a debt of gratitude. But he then wore his Army Ranger uniform in an assault on the U.S. Capitol, and for that he was prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. They say you went there in military gear with body armor, with scissors, these kinds of things, that you were prepared for war, you were prepared for battle, and this was premeditated.
So the only thing that was premeditated about the way that I dressed was so that I could represent how I've already invested sweat and blood equity into this country that I love dearly. I was leaving. I had a job interview the very next day, and taking over the Capitol was not on my agenda.
This is January 6th.
In pardoning the January 6 defendants, one poll showed 6 out of 10 Americans disagreed with freeing those convicted of assaulting police officers. People like Morss, who battled with Capitol and Metropolitan Police, organizing a so-called shield wall and exhorting other protesters to storm the building.
When it comes to my situation, the simple assault that I'm guilty of, I could have inflicted on somebody by flicking them in the elbow. So it wasn't like I murdered somebody.
You were accused of trying to take a baton from an officer, taking a shield from another officer, organizing what you called a shield wall, had a heave-ho. Officers were injured in that heave-ho. Isn't that an assault on a police officer?
What they don't want to show you is the video footage of me being beaten with that baton numerous times before I decided to, disarm the police officer and stop that.
In Morss's telling, it was police who initially provoked the protesters, he says, lobbing flashbangs into the crowd. He also cites FBI informants and about 200 left-wing operators whom he says dressed as MAGA, inciting protesters and instigating the assault, luring them into what he calls a lobster trap of violence. But Robert, doesn't that sound like an abdication of responsibility? You're saying, people instigated this, forced me into taking actions I didn't want to take?
Well, I think anybody that gets in a fight kind of gets, sucked into having to defend themselves and would rather have not been in that situation at all. But what I will say is that I owned my decisions that day. In my sentencing speech, I make the statement that Donald Trump did not force me or coerce me to do what I did that day. I did everything on my own accord.
Do you have remorse for what you did that day?
I have remorse for the fact that people were killed. I have remorse for the fact that police officers were injured. And I have remorse for the fact that my family and friends suffered while I was going through what I went through. But for standing up for what I believe in, no. For being an American that has already served this country honorably and was willing to represent that with what I wore that day, and to claim publicly that the election was stolen in 2020, no. And so it's a mixed bag.
Now, Robert Morss is traveling around the country and spoke with me from Reno, Nevada, but he intends to come back to Pennsylvania, where he'd like to get his master's degree and begin teaching again. Now, coming up at 6 o'clock, I'll ask him whether parents should want him teaching their kids. Andy Sheehan, KDKA-TV News.